Thanks for being with us. So her mother was a Holocaust survivor. Her father was a prisoner of war and Nagasaki bombing survivor. Her book, Meant to Be, tells the story of how her parents met through truly remarkable circumstances. And next week, she's going to be speaking at the annual UN World Interfaith Harmony Week. Author Roslyn Franken joins us now. Hi, Roslyn. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So with a story like your parents, I totally see why you would be compelled to write a book about them. Can you tell us a little bit about their story?
Absolutely. Well, growing up, they were just my parents. When you're a child, you don't realize that their story is very special until you get older and people say, what? Your mother survived the Holocaust? She was in Auschwitz and survived the gas chambers 3 times and survived? And wait, and your father was in Japan and was a prisoner of war and survived the bomb in Nagasaki? Like, how is that possible? How did they survive? How did they meet? And how did they end up in Montreal after the war? Like, how did all of this happen? And I realized, yeah, this is a pretty amazing story, and it really needs to be told. And as someone who loves to write and tell stories, I had to put it in a book and make sure that my family history lives on for future generations.
So your mother faced the gas chamber 3 times. How did she survive that?
I know, incredible, right?
It's amazing.
3 times there was either a malfunction in the gas supply or they had gassed so many people that day they had run out of gas.
Oh, my gosh.
Can you imagine? And this happened 3 separate times. And before they could fix the problem, she was being put on a train and being shipped off to the next camp because she was in 11 different concentration camps in total.
And then tell us
amazing, right?
It's unbelievable. Honestly, Roslyn, it's staggering. It's an incredible story. And then tell us about your father, John. So your father was a Dutch prisoner of war?
Correct. He was drafted into the Dutch Navy Air Force at age 18, and while still in boot camp was captured by the Japanese. And there's so many things that he suffered that I talk about and write about, but a few months before the bomb was dropped, he volunteered to work in the coal mines, and that saved his life because when the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, my father was hundreds of meters underground. Again, meant to be.
Meant to be.
Miracles upon miracles.
What a perfect title for the book. And then how did they come to meet, and how did they come to Montreal, or did they meet here in Montreal?
Good questions. They met through a mutual friend and who introduced them by correspondence. My mother was still living in Amsterdam, the whole story of how she ended up back in Amsterdam after the war, and my father ended up, he had already been living in Montreal, so he ended up in Montreal because after the war, looking for work, he found that a company, if you remember, good old Canadair. Do you remember Canadair?
Yeah, I do.
Yes, so they were looking for aircraft mechanics, and my dad saw an ad in the newspaper in the Netherlands, and he said, hey, why not? His brother had already been living here, and he thought, why not? I'm going to go to Montreal. And they fell in love through writing letters. And
wow.
Then my mother came to Montreal to be with my dad. And, it's an amazing story.
So here we are at International Holocaust Remembrance Day this week. And I'm wondering, as you tell your story, and I'm sure a lot of people listening today recounting their own memories and the history of what it was for their families here. How difficult is this when you meet a group of people who you're telling the story to who seemingly don't have really any knowledge of this at all?
That's a really good question because it's difficult because I know that especially because there's still people out there who, as you know, think the whole thing was made up, was a hoax, or that it never happened. And for me, that is very, very difficult to swallow, to accept. My mother and so many of the survivors with the numbers on their arm to show what they went through, their badge of honor in a way that they actually survived to tell the story. And yet there are people who either don't believe it or when they hear about it, they can't fathom that this really happened. Yeah. They know nothing about the history and the evil that so many people perpetrated back in that time that it is hard for people to imagine. So people need to be educated, and especially young people. That is very close to my heart, is speaking at schools for young people, for them to know.
I'm curious, when you do speak to young people, outside of the fact, and you're right, and it's sad to read, I saw a story just the other day suggesting now up to a quarter of people who were asked about this actually believe that either it was a hoax or never happened or whatever. But what do young people ask after you've talked to them? What's their first question? Is there typically a first question that most of them want to know?
Questions and comments are not just about like the history of what my parents survived, but they look at my parents and go, my God, the fact that they went through all that and that they were able to live a joyful life afterwards. And how did they have such an appreciation for life and be such good people after seeing how horrible people could be? That is very enlightening when they say things like that, or when they say things, my gosh, you know, I thought that I'm going through hard times. Look at what your parents went through. If they could get through all of that, I can get through what I'm going through.
Yeah.
And to me, with, you know, teen depression and suicides on the rise, especially with the pandemic and everything, to reach young people with this story and have them give me comments like that afterwards, or ask me about my parents' resiliency and positivity and how it impacted me in my life, I mean, that is extremely rewarding to know that I'm touching their lives with my parents' story.
I bet. I'm
so sure
very glad you're telling this story, and I'm so very glad that you wrote this book. Meant to be. I can't wait to read it. So you're going to be speaking at the World Interfaith Harmony Week next week. So glad to meet you, and so glad to hear a bit of your parents' story, Roslyn.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if people want to know more about the events, the website is interfaithcouncilhalton.com.
interfaithcouncilhalton.com.
All right. Thank you so much,
yes, they can register there.
Yeah, Roslyn Franken.
On Zoom, so people everywhere can attend.
All right.
Excellent.
Thank you.